level of comfort that the major institutional investors in developed economies and even in developing economies like to see. So eager to get into more detail about that. I think that we've got some solutions that we can provide, but I don't want to talk for too long. So I'll turn it back to you, Ursula.
That's great. No, thank you for that. So bearing in mind these, very real challenges and the desire to address them, maybe Kirsten, would you be able to tell us a little bit about how private sector participants could work more effectively with your organisation in their effort to advance sustainable economic development?
Yes, of course, Ursula. Thank you. And again, let me add my last of the three. Thanks for the opportunity to join this event today and to be part of this extraordinary meeting of minds. I think from my perspective, I am working in an environment which is working in developed contexts. I'm working in Europe, but also working in developing nations in Sub-Saharan Africa and South America and so on. And what I perceive, I would certainly wish to build and reflect the challenges identified. One of the things that I perceive in addition is the significant gap between ambition and intention and even formal commitments to act and the reality of implementation. So if I turn that into what it is that really private sector participants could contribute, it's certainly the matching dollar by dollar and the multiples. But in particular, it is the ability or the willing to fund the messy middle. So, and that it means thinking beyond and outside of the more linear, discrete, deliverable, individual deliverable, predictable lines of sight that align to a single investment, a definitive outcome within a discrete period of time with a predictable or a predicted multiple of return. Because the challenge we're dealing with here is a complexity and a scale of action that is inherently uncertain. It's multidimensional in both its needs and in the solutions we need to bring to it. And the messy middle that I'm describing is the orchestration, not of individual initiatives, but of the relationships and connections and combinations of multiple initiatives to achieve the transformations we need at the scale we need them. So that means not, for example, individual energy substitutes. It means the combination of multiple alternative sources of energy with a redesign and a change in the infrastructure that enables those sources of energy to be joined up and used, with a change in the rules-making system, the policy system, the financial incentives, and in the behavioral perceptions and adoption mechanisms that allow the demand to pull through at the scale we need to change entire markets. So what that requires is action in that relationship between a willingness to commit at, for example, global scale or even national, regional scale, and the reality of incredibly complex, slow, bureaucratic processes on the ground, a failure of ambition in many cases to imagine transformation at the scale of whole cities or whole value chains or whole countries, challenges in terms of the way in which public money can be invested, restrictions in procurement, restrictions in implementation timeframes, fear of misappropriation, so often a tendency to revert to incremental solutions rather than bold or breakthrough solutions, and in particular, habits of investment that tend to look for single bankable assets rather than combinations of multiple technologies that in combination produce a whole that is significantly greater than some of the parts. That is possible, it's happening, but it's very, very hard to get investment directed towards it. And it means something like investment directed at place-based or value chain-based portfolios, not financial portfolios, but real economy portfolios grounded in whole cities or whole agricultural basins, or indeed whole countries trying to go towards some form of circular economy or adaptation-based economies.
Thank you, Kirsten. So in terms of addressing and moving forward, what emerging technologies do you regard as most critical for global deployment if we're then to try to meet the Paris goals?
I'm happy to start with something that's a little bit, well, perhaps the less conventional responses. I would begin, if we're talking particularly about the developing world and we're talking about from here to 2100, we're talking about very significant scale construction. And therefore the technologies in wood in construction, in bio-based materials, nanocrystallization of lignin, technologies in design, in architecture and planning that enable us to create carbon sinks as we create habitats for humans, a significant degree and a kind of an exponential shift in nature-based solutions, biomimicry, the technologies at all scales, including nano, that allow us to learn from the way in which the natural environment makes use of resources and materials and regenerates and restores. There is an extraordinary wealth of them, but they're not usually on the front-running scales of the technologies that are called out. I would include within that four-dimensional printing, the advanced manufacturing that prints materials that have the properties that can change themselves, coming out of the MIT. And I certainly would bring two others to it. One is obviously AI, but AI with a massive kind of warning sticker, coded by people who are seeking to design for a regenerative, restorative society and community and way of living, which is not currently happening. And that in the form of, say, virtual multi-agent technologies that can begin, for example, to automate agricultural production for carbon capture. And the last I would want to bring is a very human technology, and that is narrative and story. We need the narratives that impel us, that compel us towards a thrivable future that is deeply and entirely regenerative. And those technologies are the ones we might have forgotten to put at the forefront of our actions.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I'm just going to pause there for a second. Jake Mafalda, did you want to add anything on technologies, or did you want me to move on to lessons learned?
I mean, on technologies, besides what Kirsten just mentioned, and of course, you know, we can think of different timeframes in terms of different technologies. I think we need to see a lot more deployment and adoption of technologies that do exist, but the deployment has to significant scale up, so that the cost curves and the learning curves can actually happen. And facilitate adoption at scale. So things like storage on the energy sector, storage solutions, green hydrogen, smart grid solutions are things that are technologies available now that need much significant deployment. I would stress, I think probably Kirsten was thinking about this as well in one of when she talked about bio-based materials, but I would stress that we do need new technologies and solutions around new materials for the heavy industry. The industrial sector is a sector that needs a lot more attention and a lot more work with and investments on. And anything that drives all of the technologies that really drive the implementation of circular economies, and this can be, I mean, this is multiple things, of course, but I think we need really, we pay lip service in many circles to circular economy and what circular economy means, and we really need, and I agree with Kirsten in this, that we need to see a lot more of coherent investment packages, what she's calling portfolios, that bring a number of things together. Because if in a city, for example, we have investors just investing in energy, or if we have investors just investing in transport or in waste management, in isolation, without really pooling the investors together and all of the capacity and human and financial capacity that is necessary to really drive that vision of a circular economy, it's not going to be possible. So we really need, and in that sense, you know, to me, one of the critical technologies is pushing imagination within human beings, that things can be different and can be done differently.
And maybe I would just add, first of all, I was very intrigued to learn of Kirsten's list, and I would love to learn more about a number of these opportunities, particularly on the 4D printing and AI side. I think that, I just underscore Mafalda's point that in so many of the economies where we're working on either mitigation or adaptation challenges, the technology that we need is already there. And I think that sometimes we get stuck in this discussion of, what amount of innovation do we need on the simple low-hanging fruit, when what we really need to be doing is just deploying faster and at a larger scale. And I'll give you one example, because I think that maybe does implicate some other tech challenges. We're looking at a lot of offshore wind projects. And now offshore wind is expected, you're talking about a wind turbine that is going to be at the scale of 15 or 20 megawatts. It's going to be either fixed or floating, and it's going to be able to deliver power at a capacity factor that is comparable to baseload thermal generation in some markets where you're talking about 50% or 55% capacity factor. And so in some regards, the technology on the wind component is off the charts. But what is the challenge to actually getting that deal done is that we need to do an environmental and social impact analysis that requires a year of wind data, cumulative impact data, ocean floor mapping data, fish and birds and dolphins, migratory and commercial fishery data. And actually, we don't have the technology tools available to do that. So, I think this goes back to sort of a broader theme that I've heard a few times here, which is that when we're talking about some of these challenges, there really is a need for more comprehensive and sort of intersectional thinking in terms of how one solution or challenge implicates a whole other series or suite of technologies and tools that we need to be using all at once.
Yeah, no, that raises a really interesting point, because as you say, there's a lot of discussion around the development of sustainable technology, but it's the infrastructure and the ancillary services around that are also, just as important in reaching those goals. So maybe Jake, are there any recent examples from your organization of investing in sustainable technologies that might offer some insights or lessons learned for entrepreneurs seeking financing in this area?
Well, to be very candid, my organization is presently not that great at investing in early stage technologies. We've done a lot of debt and project finance. We have new authority to make equity investments and to invest in funds and to do earlier stage investing through a technical assistance facility that we've recently set up. And we're going to spend $50 million over the next 5 years through that facility. But in the world, I'll give you an anecdotal example. We recently did a meeting with a cohort of 5 or 6 very early stage nature-based carbon removal solutions. And these were companies that are doing work in geological sequestration, in kelp forestry, in land-based forestry, in pyrolysis and carbon sequestration. There was a company that's doing direct air capture. And we know that these are the types of technologies that we need to be investing in, and we need the cost curve to come down. And one of the ways in which we think DFC can help in that regard is we've made a net zero commitment. We're going to be net zero by the year 2040. And what that means is, from a GHG accounting perspective, we actually need to invest in carbon removal projects. It also means that we can one day potentially become an off-taker, a customer of some of these clients, and not just an investor in them, in order to give them and the market some long-term certainty that they're going to have customers. But the thing that's challenging is we don't quite have the right sort of financial tools, which we would want to be able to make those sorts of early stage and high risk investments. And so what we try to do in that scenario is we partner with our sister agencies throughout the federal government, folks like U.S. Agency for International Development, the Department of Energy, which has a number of earlier stage climate tech funds, including ARPA-E. And we try to find sort of what the right financial tool might be where we can at least bring those companies into our ecosystem, start developing a relationship, and start investing early, whether it's from DFC or from another agency. But I wish I had a better answer for your question, because the truth is that what we're really good at doing is large scale project finance for technology that has already been demonstrated at scale. And we're trying to get better at the earlier stage stuff.
Great, thanks, Jake. And Mafalda, did you have any additional insight into lessons learned from the experience at World Bank?
So, I mean, our experience has been, we have been financing since we started off in 2008. We have actually been financing technologies and solutions that did not exist in the developing markets. They might have been already commercialized in other economies, in developed markets, but not in developing countries. And in some cases, in the case of concentrated solar power, for example, we were a very large financier of the first concentrated solar power plants in the developing world. And the private sector sponsors themselves speak to not only how important the risk capital was and the concessional capital, but the fact that they learned so much on a variety of areas, plant optimization, procurement, and so on, that they could then bid at a much lower, they could have much lower bids in other markets that they participated in as well. So that was actually the role of the climate investment funds, was to spearhead these technologies and solutions in developing countries. So we have done, 2 of the first wind farms in Mexico, the first geothermal power plant in South America, first utility scale private sector solar plant in Mali, the 3 first CSP private sector projects in South Africa, first of its kind lines of credit for resilience in certain markets, where the solutions that were being offered to the SMEs and to the entrepreneur were solutions that they weren't yet adopting. So this speaks to what we were talking about earlier, which is we have technologies that are available and are not being deployed. And what institutions like mine do is we bring a group of other institutions to work alongside our risk capital and concessional capital, and basically then make sure that these investments are happening in these countries, and that the private sector can then scale up after the first, second, third round of investments. More recently, we've also started looking at more of the early stage technologies, and we actually have an intent to have actually a dedicated investment window that we are calling Climate Ventures, through which we can support different things, direct and indirect investments, but also marketplace activities and technical assistance and drive knowledge. But we've more recently been, we are a financier to the ADB Ventures facility. So our Asian Development Bank has set up a ventures facility, and we are providing risk capital to that facility. We are providing risk capital to another program of the Inter-American Development Bank, what they call innovative instruments for investments in zero carbon emissions. And so we are financing things such as prepaid distributed renewable energy to off-grid consumers. We have been financing for some time things such as open data tools that really, these type of tools such as open data, drone imaging, crowdsourcing platforms. So these are investments that we have been making as well. But as I said, we want to now be quite a little bit more deliberate and try to support these ecosystems of earlier stage technologies, because we do have the flexibility. We have the flexibility that our partner implementing entities don't have. We have the flexibility in terms of tools, the financial instruments, and we have the flexibility in terms of the how risk-bearing the capital can be.
Great, thank you. So the recent G7 meeting culminated with the Carbis Bay communique, and the G7 members committed to lead a technology-driven transition to net zero. They called upon MTBs and DFIs to prioritize capital mobilization strategies, initiatives and incentives to achieve this end. The Build Back Better World, or B3W program, was endorsed, and to deal with the Global Infrastructure Partnership to achieve these goals, and in response to China's Belt and Road Initiative. So how important is it for the Western democracies to collaborate on B3W and the technology development and deployment process? Kirsten, maybe you could give us some views on that.
Well, I think it is absolutely, collaboration is absolutely essential for many of the reasons that have already been discussed, because the value chains and the industry particularly that we need to intervene and to address and to take forward to transformation in accelerated ways operates internationally, operates at a global scale, is deeply caught up with global trade, and trade is one of the areas where there is least kind of penetration and genuine transformation in terms of the ways in which we're making decisions and the ways in which finance and funds are flowing. So collaboration is absolutely essential. I would really, if we're going to be citing Carbis Bay, I think we probably need to throw down the gauntlet to do a hell of a lot better. So for a start, let's not talk about building back better. We need to be talking about building forward better. Building back better takes us, unfortunately, in the wrong direction. And I think we also need to be extremely careful to think, what is it that we're aiming for? We have an IPCC 1.5 degree report that Jake was referring to before, published in 2018. There are two scenarios in there that more or less speak to that possibility, P4 and P1. P4 is a world we simply do not have the means to create, and yet we are behaving as if that's the way we're going to do it. We're going to be essentially substituting our existing ways of living with new forms of renewable energy, and we're going to suck a whole lot of carbon out of the air and store it in the ground, and it'll be okay. And we have two signals that it's not going to be okay. We are already beyond the threshold of 1.5. We're already at 1.3, 1.4, we're at 1.5 by 2030. We do not have the option of going as slowly as even the IPCC 2018 report suggests. And the early signals and early releases from the next stage of scientific evidence from IPCC really points to the fact that we are already out of time. We need the P1 scenario, but the P1 scenario is one of a completely different way of thinking about thrivability. It's a different world. That's not a build back better. That's a radical transformation. So it definitely needs radical collaborations. And if I think about what that means in terms of the way in which finance comes to play, and particularly the way in which private sector participants in finance come to play, this is really about investing explicitly in the intersectoral combinations that we've been talking about and that you've heard each of us refer to, and investing explicitly in combinations. If I give an example, the work that is, there are some contexts, for example, in, say, European contexts that are interesting to look at, not necessarily because they're success stories, but because they're intentions that create a stable enough, hopefully a stable enough market signal to really pull forward the kind of combinations of blended finance that we need to come in alongside risk capital. Something like the European Green Deal pilot on net zero cities, which is calling for 100 plus 100, so 200 in total cities, to sign up to a formal contract to fully decarbonize at the scale of the whole city by 2030. That sets a market signal. No matter how hard or easy or how kind of realistic or possible it is, it's irrelevant. It sets a very strong market signal to which it is possible to start mobilizing combinations of capital and really start to mobilize combinations of innovations. And that indeed is some of the work, for example, we're doing in looking at how do you then really combine algae solutions, wastewater solutions, electrification of energy and transport, distributed ledger to create microgrids that genuinely do produce decentralized production and consumption. Combine that with trees as infrastructure, think about the change in air quality as it relates to health, and think about offtakes and securitizing the future value and future reduction of healthcare costs and so on. And you begin to create a financial ecosystem that has multiple non-correlated cash flows, not just present, but future value that you can start to pull into the present. But you need that stabilizing signal of large scale, enormous transformation sufficient to really mobilize the change. Agencies like CleanEquity or working as hard as possible with every other multilateral agency and the European agency can try and create and we are creating the conditions for that. But it really needs very large scales of capital willing to invest in those terms.
Yeah. So what, Mafalda, maybe you could take us to what sort of tangible progress on these efforts should we expect to see, and how would your organization be contributing to those efforts?
I mean, it's quite clear to everybody that, we are not really acting at the speed or scale that is necessary. And also we need to see a lot more progress on creating narratives and stories. It's a little bit what Kirsten was talking about, that mobilize more people to act and make different decisions. I like to say, and I've said it before in other circumstances, individuals sometimes, we as individuals don't really appreciate the power we have within ourselves, because we are making a bunch of decisions that actually matter on a day-to-day basis. We are consumers, we are investors, we elect the officials that go into governments. So we actually make a lot of important decisions, and therefore there's that need of this, these narratives that mobilize people. So I wanted to start with that. While saying that, to say as well that to me, one of the most interesting outcomes of the recent G7 meetings and communique was the recognition that we need to phase out of coal. Coal is the single largest source of CO2 or GHG emissions. And the fact that and again, this is the signal that these economies, the largest economies, are signaling we are moving away from this source of energy, and we are going to be supporting other countries, because we know that developing countries matter here, do the same. So that to me was quite encouraging. We were also given a mandate to support in those efforts, and very much look forward to doing that. And the fact that they also recognized, and I see it more and more internationally and in my discussions with multiple institutions and stakeholders, the critical recognition that these needs to be just, socially just. These transformations need to be socially just. If we don't place that at the heart of these reforms and the investments, we are going to fail. And so to me, I know there was a lot of other interesting things coming out of this G7, but from a climate perspective, I think this was a big achievement, and I think we will see a buildup of momentum around this in the lead up to the COP, and we will see a lot more of efforts and commitments, which then need to be translated, of course, into actual action on the ground, because we can't stay only with the political statements and the commitments. But I wanted to, sometimes while we need to keep saying that we need to speed up and really accelerate and think differently and imagine things differently, we also have to recognize when these type of signals and breakthroughs are ahead of us. we will not meet the 1.5 without moving away from coal. So, and people have to understand this. They really have to understand that unless if we act on transitioning all of those coal-fired power plants. And by the way, in developing countries, most of them are still economical. That's the other argument that I see often in various debates, is that it's not economical anymore. That is the case in developed countries. That is not the case in developing countries. The economics might play out in a few years so that most of those coal-fired power plants are no longer economical. But at the moment, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just jump in, because this is a wonderful discussion, and I think Mafalda just raised maybe implicitly a question that we could pose to our friends who are making the policy, which is that when you look at something like, what costs are we counting when we think of an economical project? And tying this back to the conversation on environmental justice and public health, the economics of a coal-fired power plant, of course, don't take into account all of the public health costs around their impacts and negative externalities that we haven't really captured in those transactions. But I think that this is sort of part of why the Build Back Better for the World initiative is so critical. Because notwithstanding Kirsten's fair point on the messaging of it, although I think that the back is referring to, economic recovery from COVID, and the idea that as we do build our economies back, that we're going to be pouring hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars into infrastructure, and we should make sure that those investments are done from a climate-friendly perspective. And I think it really draws a contrast with what's happening in the Belt and Road Initiative in two regards. Number one is that BRI has no qualms about investing in fossil fuel infrastructure, including coal, and pouring cement and installing steel that is super high carbon and really doesn't make an attempt to think about, opportunities for decarbonization. And then number two, on the actual financing structures, a lot of the projects that we've seen come out of BRI, and now we've got a few years of data that we're able to reflect on, have left countries debt-ridden with projects that are not functional or sustainable, and that have not satisfied local labor and environmental standards, because in many cases, the labor for some of these projects is shipped in. There are questionable labor practices all the way up and down the supply chain. And so I think one of the key points about the Build Back Better concept is that we would be together as a unified G7 and others, really driving a values-based alternative that it says to the market, we know that there's demand for infrastructure projects, for clean energy projects, for resilience projects, and we want to provide the financing that doesn't lead to a debt trap, that doesn't lead to poor labor and environmental standards, and that promises a more sustainable future. So as you can tell, I'm a big advocate for the G7 coming together to do this. And I think if DFC, again, just to put the scale into stark relief, we've got we do $60 billion total. I think the BRI last year, one of the estimates I saw was they invested north of 600 billion in a year. So, there's no chance to really do this unless we do it together.
That's really interesting, and leads quite well into the last question I wanted to ask, actually. Maybe Jake, you could take this one first. So if there was one change you could make in global development finance and how it's practiced, what would that be and why?
I would encourage us to take more risk. I would say, let's be comfortable taking that place in the capital stack that's first loss or more concessional. I'd want us to do more equity deals that are earlier stage. And I'd want us to really signal to the private sector that we are a public finance institution. We're not in the business of losing money, but we also don't have a profit mandate. The statute that created my agency requires that we have what is called an appropriate financial return. And so I would like us to consider that investing in climate-friendly solutions and resilience and adaptation and projects that may not necessarily create clear returns, but do create an appropriate outcome are perfectly ripe for us to proceed with.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Mafalda, one change you would like to make?
That's I mean, certainly I would not dispute at all what Jake just said. And there are increasing calls for that we have to take on more risks. We have to imagine. It's very difficult for us as human beings because we tend to prefer not being risk takers and doing what we know well. But we do need to imagine things very differently and actually act on that imagination. I think we have many meetings. What surprises me about this whole community is that there are many meetings and many events, and what I don't see coming out, there should be an equivalent scale of really good proposals and structures and coming out of these meetings that would actually deliver things on the ground. So there should be a comparable scale to this. I think we have a lot more meetings and a lot more conversations and a lot more gatherings than actually what comes out in terms of tangible, very tangible partnerships amongst the relevant institutions that can then commit, okay, in this country or this group of countries or in this city or this group of cities, these are the group of institutions we need to really collectively come together and make a big difference. So we still we have seen the power of again, there's a lot of lip service to the word platforms, and I always see a lot of announcements around platforms and the need for platforms, but most of these platforms are not really driving action on the ground. So I think we need to really use platforms that exist, create any other relevant platforms that are needed, where you are bringing institutions together that really need to work together, like we were just saying here, because they have not actually been working together. Sets of institutions, they work together, they are sort of like homogeneous, they work together, but then we are not really seeing, the necessary interinstitutional collaboration that we need with new partners that, institutions have never worked with, and really, make sure that out of those platforms, we have transformative programs being delivered in many parts of the world that can play this demonstration effect that then can be multiplied and scaled up.
So let me pick up from that. And I think my response is speaking as from an organization that is doing development of innovation and deployment on the ground from very, very early stage, right through to kind of larger scale combinations and scaling upwards and outwards, as well as scaling down. And that means practically we are literally on the ground, capturing and identifying, most importantly, the needs for transformation in specific cities or specific value chains or agricultural areas or countries. Needs that are also about what's the distance between where we are now, for example, and going to fully circular industries where all the industries in this particular country are engaged in some form of, or in a fully circular and regenerative set of ecosystem habits. So speaking from that perspective, the single greatest challenge that we face is definitely a failure of imagination and a kind of deeply risk-averse habit and practice of investment. People are interested in the idea, but when it comes to deploying capital, or in both public funding as well as private funding, they are waiting to see the demonstrable example of when and how a single initiative will produce value. And a large part of the problem is when you are looking at how to decarbonize an entire city, you're talking about deploying cement, steel, gyprock, trees, nature-based solutions, glass, polyester fibers, resin. The whole system has to be transformed. It can be. All of those innovations, as Mafalda said several times, are often already there. But it's a question of supporting simultaneously multiple initiatives that are all happening simultaneously on the ground, and investing in the activity that extracts from those innovation applications the critical intelligence needed to support larger amounts of investment, larger directions of effort in policymaking and regulation to pull them together or encourage different combinations of solutions to then be combined into something larger, and the decision support to then really change whole body of regulation to make it possible to invest even further. So I think the one thing I would want to shift is logic with which we are investing. If we tend to be thinking about, can I find a solution that is a climate friendly or a climate positive action solution to invest in, as opposed to, we are facing a world where the disruption of not finding solutions and not applying them and not combining them in time is so significant that, in fact, what we should be investing in is, as much as we can possibly cobble together, to invest in a sufficiently creative, positive, sustainable, just transition through to a series of very different ways of living that does enable us to do so in a way that is not completely disruptive, either politically, socially, or economically. So it's almost like we need to invert it and say, how much of the capital we have moving around the world are we willing to invest to keep our world stable enough as it moves into very different ways of living, very different definitions of value? And that requires us to completely redefine what the value is we are investing in, as Jake said very clearly. It's really about, if you're an investment fund, for example, or let's say take a pension fund. If you're a pension fund seeking to maximize the outcome of a pension for all your pension holders, and you look forward to the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you're looking into a world of such significant destabilizing transitions, everything from kind of heat waves, storms, floods, and so on, but also the transitions that new technologies, new regulation, new economic models will bring. How much of your portfolio is it worth investing in innovations now to combine as quickly as possible now to bring people through a transition in a stable way, so that in fact what you're investing in is the stability of a world in which people can spend their pensions? And that kind of thinking, I think, is the one thing I would like to see come through in the way in which public and private finance blends and meets one another.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's been a fantastically interesting conversation, and really grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Mongo, Andy, Kirsten, Ursula, thank you very much. I need to jump into my next meeting as well. Take care.
Thanks, Mafalda.
So we will be joined shortly by Dr. Andrew Steer and Thomas Reilly. I'm just miking up, I'll be with you in 30 seconds. Dr. Andrew Steer is President and CEO of the Bezos Earth Fund. And Thomas Reilly is senior advisor to Covington and Burling. Right. Please sit down. Could you sit there just for 2 minutes, because we have a little surprise for everybody. That'd be great. I'm not going to, there's no way I can give a forward to this, but it is a little surprise, and then the moment this is finished, Thomas, can you take over, please? Thank you.
The interdependence between human health and planetary health has never been more clear. As we start a new decade, it is time to focus on the future we wish to build and indeed leave for generations to come. Humanity has made incredible progress over the past century, yet the cost of this progress has caused immense destruction to the planet that sustains us. We simply cannot maintain this course indefinitely. To build a productive and sustainable future, it is critical that we accelerate and mainstream sustainability into every aspect of our economy. To move forward, there must be a center of gravity to catalyze such a monumental effort and to mobilize the resources and incentives required. To that end, building on my Sustainable Markets Initiative, I am launching the Terra Carta as the basis of a recovery plan for nature, people, and planet. At this historic tipping point, with the lives and livelihoods of present and future generations in mind, the Terra Carta aims to provide a roadmap for acceleration towards an ambitious and sustainable future, one that will harness the power of nature combined with the transformative power, innovation, and resources of the private sector. For nearly every problem we face, nature, with the benefit of billions of years of evolution, has already provided us with the solutions. Universal principles rooted in the harmony of nature's patterns, cycles, and geometry, which ancient civilizations and indigenous peoples have known all too well, needs to be harnessed to inform science, technology, design, and engineering, and can, in fact, drive a sustainable future. But time is fast running out, and we are rapidly wiping out, through mass extinctions, many of nature's unique treasure trove of species from which we can develop innovative and sustainable products for the future. Timelines for change must be brought forward if we are to make a transformative shift by the end of the decade and before it is, quite literally, too late. Over the coming years, my Sustainable Markets Initiative will report on and update the Terra Carta regularly in order to reflect the rapid pace of change and continuous progress being achieved around the world. If we consider the legacy of our generation, more than 800 years ago, the Magna Carta inspired a belief in the fundamental rights and liberties of people. As we strive to imagine the next 800 years of human progress, the fundamental rights and value of nature lie at the heart of the Terra Carta and represent a step change in our future of industry and future of economy approach. Today must be the decisive moment that we make sustainability the growth story of our time, while positioning nature as the engine of our economy. To help us succeed and to complement global efforts across public, private, and philanthropic sectors, I am calling on CEOs from around the world to engage and play their part in leading the global transition. To guarantee our future, we have no other choice but to make each day count. And it must start today.
A big thank you to His Royal Highness. And Thomas, thank you very much. Andrew, over to you.
Andrew, thank you. When I was speaking to His Royal Highness's office to gain permission to show this film and to get a quote from him, which I hope will come at some point during the day, I was really struck by that sense of urgency. We cannot go on like this. Evolution is not possible. We are in a place where revolution is necessary and transformation has to take the place of the word transition. And so I was really pleased to hear that you were going to be here with us today, Andrew, because I think what the Bezos Fund is about is that transformation. So I'd like to start our conversation, and there should be a conversation, so please pipe up from the floor if you have any questions. What is the Bezos Fund? What's its objective? How does this work? Please.
Well, first, thank you, Thomas. Thanks, Mungo. How cool it is to have, we've had two princes today, His Serene Highness this morning and His Royal Highness just now, both absolutely committed to this decisive decade and both absolutely consistent with the messages we've heard this morning, where you have brave entrepreneurs taking big risks, sitting together in this room, and I understand there are thousands online, sitting together with those who are going to put real finance on the table, because we do need to take more risks this decade. So thank you for asking about the Bezos Earth Fund. Jeff Bezos, as you know, very generously made $10 billion available, and he didn't want it to be created into some foundation that was going to last forever. He said, this is the decisive decade. I want it spent down this decade, provided as grants or as guarantees or as advanced market commitments, but mainly grants, in order to help accelerate precisely the transitions we've heard about today. And the way we look at the world is the same way you do, which is we need to halve greenhouse gas emissions this decade. We need to halve them again next decade, and we did halve them yet again in the 2040s. And as we've heard already today, that will be the greatest, not only industrial and economic revolution, but also social revolution that we've had in our history. And of course, it's also the most exciting revolution. It's not going to make life harder. It's going to make life much better, but it has to be done right. It has to be done smartly. And so what we're going to try and do with this very generous financial contribution from Jeff Bezos is to identify the various revolutions that need to take place. There are sort of 6 or 7 big ones, energy, transport, the built environment, food systems, manufacturing, consumption, and so on. And we all know about them. And each of them have maybe, 4 or 5 mini revolutions within them, but they're not very many. So in transportation, we've got to get rid of the internal combustion engine. We've got to electrify transportation. But also in transportation, we've got to find alternative fuels for airliners and for ocean shipping and so on. And in each of these big areas, you've got these various. So overall, there are probably, 35 to 50 such revolutions that need to take place. And some of them are doing great. Certainly don't need any help from us. Wind energy in Texas doesn't need any help from us. In other areas, quite frankly, these revolutions are just stuck in the mud. They're not going anywhere. They will need some basic research, and they'll need some political activism. They'll need civil society to be supported, and we'll need a sort of revolutionary spirit. And in between those, there are all kinds of things that are required: de-risking, making markets, for example, monitoring systems, and so on, a whole range of issues that will be required. And so what we're doing is identifying each of these and saying, where can we act boldly but smartly, empirically based, and then really measure impact? And I should say, Mungo, since we are here with real entrepreneurs and scientists here today, the heart of the solution lies in those brave investors that are putting real resources, but they cannot do it on their own. They need governments, and that's why your work actually, Thomas, is so important. They need governments to do the right thing. They need the financial sector to do the right thing, and we are philanthropy. And the advantage that we bring, we hope, is that we can act quickly, we can act boldly, we can take risks where others can't, and so that's what we're trying to do.
I wasn't going to ask you this, but you've raised it. I mean, the concept that philanthropy is now somehow in the lead on this, it seems counterintuitive. Surely government should be leading the way. So what's holding back the kind of the governmental, the policy revolution? And we were discussing over lunch the concern sometimes that companies feel that legislation is done to them, and actually what we should be encouraging companies to do is get ahead of that legislative curve to help governments make better policy. But why do you think we're in this place where governments talk a good game, but actually the say-do gap is so big that philanthropists need to step into it?
Well, I think it's not just philanthropists. I think now we have a much more multifaceted sort of leadership in the world. I mean, there was a time when the conception was government set the rules and the private sector follows, either reluctantly or enthusiastically, and usually reluctantly. I don't know if that ever happened, but it certainly doesn't happen today. What you now have, and it's by no means just philanthropy, by the way, I mean, it's incredible sort of corporate leadership today. And most astonishing of all, quite frankly, is to see the financial sector now leading. I mean, my goodness me, I did a PhD in finance. If somebody had told me, when I was doing my graduate work in finance, that the job of the financial sector is to solve a problem like climate change, I would have said, what are you smoking? And in those days, that was a very credible question, by the way. It was that, but we would have said, no, our job is simply to understand risks and return and allocate funds in an efficient, neutral way. It's not for us to solve problems. We will be neutral. Well, it turned out the financial sector wasn't neutral at all. The financial sector has been anti-solutions. Why? Because it tends to be short-term, it tends to be conservative, and quite frankly, it hasn't been very good at assessing risks on things like climate. So until 10 years ago, the financial sector was net hugely negative. Now, you've got this incredible sort of leadership that's coming from certain parts of the financial sector, which is wonderful, and the corporate sector too. And one of the really amazing things, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about leadership. 2 years ago, something really astonishing happened. The IPCC came out with a report that says we thought it was okay to limit temperature rise to 2 degrees. We now know that's too much. It has to be 1.5 degrees. And that's going to require much, much, much more work. And everybody thought, my goodness me, this is it. All the so-called leaders will run for the hills. It turned out that in the corporate sector and the financial sector, the opposite happened. A whole new generation of leaders came forward and said, actually, this is our calling. We actually are going to really lead. And I mean, look at my boss, for example. He's just come back from space, which is a good thing. I'm quite sure now is even more enthusiastic because he's seen it from the outside. And look at, say, Amazon. What Amazon did, they said, IPCC says you need to go to net zero by 2050. That's not soon enough. We're going to do it by 2040, and we're going to mobilize 106 companies now that are joining us. So these are exciting times, but perilous.
Yeah, I won't make the joke about stratospheric ambition, but I think this concept of transformative change does require a systemic revolution in the way we think about things. So I know that this morning Kirsten was talking about things, and Charlotte's been talking about how you change the battery technology. But actually, it's systemic. It's everything. We were talking about my electric car, and I drove here from Provence in my electric car, and I was very pleased that I got here, and I had 85 spare kilometers, though I was beginning to get a little bit of range anxiety towards the end. I went to plug it in this morning. There are no charge points in this hotel, no fast charge points. This is a 5-star hotel. It's not a criticism, because there are plenty of places like this, but it's indicative for me of that transformative change on every level that's going to be necessary. How do we get there? How do we change people's mentality?
Well, it's the central question. Some people believe there are silver bullets. I wish there were. Some people believe there's a technology that once we just got that technology, it's going to solve everything. Actually, it doesn't work like that. It's actually a jigsaw puzzle. And the different pieces need to be put down. It's a terrific example you gave about the electrification of vehicles, which 5 years ago seemed impossible. Now, my word, I mean, we never would have dreamt that, not only the European Union, not only California, not only the British government, but General Motors, and half of all the European manufacturers have said, we will sell no more internal combustion. What does that take? It doesn't take a silver bullet. It takes the different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. It takes the demand side, the finance side, the science side, and so on. And you're absolutely right, Thomas, that so this is an interesting question. So in this hotel, there are no charge points for electric vehicles. So I hope we will all complain to the management.
Yeah, I should just say that Fairmont have been extremely generous to us and allowing us.
Yeah,
so please do not take that as a criticism.
May regret this question.
Otherwise, I will never be invited back. I probably won't be invited back anyway. But so, I mean, I think you've hit on a very interesting point there, which is let's look at revolutions. We talk about the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution, I mean, it's still going on in many respects, but it began 150, 200 years ago. The mobile phone communication revolution. I just put my phone over there. I remember the first mobile phone I had was working on a building site in 1993, and the owner of the building site came out with this enormous thing that required 2 people to lift it, and you got probably 5 minutes on the phone before the battery discharged. So that revolution, 27 years. The next revolution has got to be even shorter than that. Yeah. So, what is it that is needed to push that revolution really, really quickly? And we talked earlier about if we had an energy revolution that took 27 years, we'd be delighted. Do we have the luxury of 27 years?
Well, look, I mean, if most advanced countries are now saying we want to be net zero power, not energy, power by 2035, I mean, yes, if we can drive towards that, it will be really good. But your question is a good one, which is how do we get that kind of disruptive change? I'm sure you've all sat and listened to high-paid consultants, and they talk about disruptive change. And I always used to think, well, why does change have to be disruptive? Why can't we just have change? And then I sort of understood this whole notion of path dependency, which is what we're on. Path dependency says we're on a path. We actually know it's not the best path. I mean, we know that sitting in traffic for 3 hours a day in Mexico City is not the best that humanity can do. We know that the United States doesn't need to lose $1 trillion a year in its GDP from congestion alone. We know there are better ways. We know that you can actually spend a lot less money and you can have public transport that is comfortable and good and so on. But you can't do it. Why? Because you are path dependent. You've got not only locked in capital, but you've also got locked in vested interests. And so the only way you can do something about it is through disruptive change. And if you look at the best leaders in this space, they are those people that say things that sound ridiculous, like we'll go to the moon by the end of the decade. Or, Prime Minister Modi, when he came into power as the Prime Minister of India, he said, and everyone assumed that the previous goal to go from 3 gigawatts to 20 gigawatts of solar energy, he was going to turn that back because it sounds too expensive. He said, no, we're going to go to 100 gigawatts. Why did he do that? Because he understood disruptive change. Once you say we are going to go from 3 gigawatts to 100 gigawatts, you then have a whole bunch of business people and citizens saying, this is not your grandfather's incremental change. This is going to be an entirely new economy with new research institutes, with different kinds of skills, and so on. That's the kind of, FDR, President Roosevelt, absolutely broke the system, disrupted change. Maggie Thatcher, whether or not you like these people, it doesn't matter. Although, change things. That's the kind of change we need right now. So even Boris Johnson, when he said, okay, 2030 is the date for no more internal combustion engines, that is an example of forcing that kind of necessary disruptive change.
I mean, we were joking at lunchtime that the spaceship in which your boss went to space had to go through a tunnel to get to the launch platform, and the width of that tunnel is the width of two buttocks of two bullocks, because they used to pull the carts, and so the tunnel was built to accommodate the two bullocks' buttocks. That is classic path dependency, and if you don't break that, you end up just doing the same thing that you've always done before. But in terms of breaking it, it's got to be just. It's got to be an equitable transition. It's got to be a transition that, frankly, you and I pay for, in order that people in less developed parts of the world don't suffer an energy penalty or don't suffer having to pay money that they can't afford for things that they need. So how do you get to the point of a just transition, a just transformation?
Well, I think those of us that have been in the environmental movement need to look at ourselves in the mirror and admit, actually, we've done a pretty poor job of thinking through this issue, but it's changing rapidly. I mean, number one, it is true, proven time and time again, that it is the poor and disadvantaged that suffer most from environmental damage. So that's sort of point number one. Point number two, actually these same communities can play an incredibly important part of the solution. But point number three, which is the point I think you're really getting at, Thomas, is that the solutions themselves, whilst will benefit society as a whole, they won't necessarily benefit each individual group. So in the United States, we like to sort of point out there's only 70,000 coal miners in the United States, and there are 2 million jobs in renewable energy. So we don't need to worry. Well, those 70,000 people have families, and we do need to worry, actually. And what we need to see, if someone were to say to me, what is the biggest risk to progress this decade, it would be a massive pushback from the right-wing populists who will say, and they'll say it here in Europe, they will say, so these guys over here, these wealthy people, you just bought a very nice Jaguar.
Now I'm in real trouble because I've criticized the Fairmont. I've advertised for Jaguar.
So these guys, yes, that's fantastic. But by the way, everybody else, the government is going to make you spend 10,000 euros more for a vehicle now. That's what the elite is doing to you. So vote for me. I will stop them. That's the biggest single risk. It is that it will be an entirely new wave of populism. And we need to invest very carefully, not only in the communication, but in the substance of enabling the right kind of cross-subsidization, whereby we actually do what Professor Pigou in 1923 in Cambridge University taught us when his famous book, The Economics of Welfare. We should charge more for bad things and we should charge less and subsidize good things. Yeah. We should be taxing pollution, congestion, and we should not be taxing all those wonderful things like hard work.
So almost as if planned, that takes us into financing. I mean, it's almost as if we scripted this. Carbon credits, ETS, they're wonderful ways of pushing people into better behavior, but they're moving very slowly. So when we look at the current ETS price, I mean, everyone rejoiced when it hit 50 euros a tonne, and the UK launched at 36 pounds, I think it was, and it went very quickly to above the EU ETS. But that's not quick enough, is it? So how do we get more financing into the energy transformation? I was reading, I dread to say, I may be advertising with someone else, the Economist article the other day that was talking about the amount of money it's going to take to transform the energy sector between now and sort of mid-2030s. And it's in trillions, it's hundreds of trillions. How do we get that money? How do we mobilize that money? Where does it come from? Whose job is it to put that money into the system?
The problem is not a shortage of money. The problem is getting the money to go to the right place. Yeah. So you need governments and you need bold leadership from the corporate sector as well. I think you're making a couple of really interesting points here. One, carbon markets have not delivered the way we'd hoped. Having said that, they still can. They're still a very good thing. And they need to be managed. And so the increase in price from €5 to 60 euros, I mean, is certainly heading in the right direction, and it will not impoverish people. So it's a very good thing. The really exciting space at the moment is probably, as you know, in sort of voluntary carbon markets, where literally tens of billions of dollars will be provided by corporates who have committed to net zero. And this is where things do start getting a little bit complicated. Not only have 100 countries committed to net zero by the middle of the century, but also a couple of thousand major corporations have committed to get to net zero either by 2050 or by 2040, or some even by 2030. Now, what net zero means is still under debate. We know what it means for the planet, but what it means for an individual corporation, there is different interpretations on the part of some corporations, quite frankly, and we have to be extremely careful that they don't use carbon markets in order to enable themselves to keep on polluting and then compensate, so to speak. We've long passed the era where if you're a steel company, you can say, well, I don't need to do anything about carbon emissions this decade because it's much cheaper if I buy some carbon credits over here. No, they need to do something this decade or we're never going to solve the problem we're talking about. So it's a very, very vibrant time intellectually right now on carbon markets, but some very exciting things are happening. There's something called Project Leaf, which was announced on the 22nd of April at President Biden's big heads of state meeting, where private sector is putting a lot of money in, and 3 governments, the UK government, Norway, and the United States, are working with another 20 governments around the world to use voluntary carbon markets to implement nature-based solutions. So, but your broader question, Thomas, about how do you get this entire shift around is a subject for a much bigger conference. The incredibly encouraging thing is that we're now seeing, thanks to people like Mark Carney and David Blood and other people like that, and now even the United States Federal Reserve, for the first time, is actually starting to take these things seriously. The United States Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, is absolutely committed to act on these things, and obviously in Europe as well, when you've got Christine Lagarde running the EIB, the Central Bank of Europe, rather, you're going to see progress that we would not have imagined before. And someone like Kristalina Georgieva, who's heading the IMF, is, truly remarkable what she's doing. I had the privilege of being the director of environment and social policy for the World Bank 100 years ago in the 1990s. And actually the person who took my job was Kristalina Georgieva. She was the director of environment and social policy, and now I think of it, she's heading the International Monetary Fund. Truly committed. So things are heading in the right direction, but not fast enough.
Well, that was the next question, actually. We've spoken a lot about net zero, and you just mentioned it, and a lot of companies have said, we will be net zero by date X, which for the companies involves quite a significant A, commitment, B, change. First of all, are those plans for net zero realistic? And secondly, and I think more importantly, and I'm leading you here in a classic barrister's manner, is 2050 quick enough?
Well, look, if the whole world were to go to net zero by 2050, and we could have 100% guarantee that would happen, I would say job done.
Yeah.
It's still not good enough, but it is, my goodness me, that's incredible. The problem is, if the top 10,000 companies do it, and then the next 90,000 companies don't do it, the math doesn't add up. And that's precisely why, for example, the climate pledge, which is what something Amazon started, is say, let's bring it forward 10 years. Why? Because we need to show leadership and others then will follow. So the question you asked, though, about what does it mean when a major company says, we're also going net zero by 2050? The question to ask them is, do you have a science-based target? And there's something called the Science-Based Target Project. It's run by 5 major NGOs. And it's the most serious way that you can tell whether or not a company is serious. And the science-based target says, okay, you're committed to 1.5 or net zero by the middle of the century. What does that imply for what you're going to do in the next 5 years and the next 10 years? So where are you committed for 2025 and 2030? And where is your transparent reporting on that line? So if you sign up for science-based targets, you not only need the long-term commitment, you need that short-term commitment. That's how you tell if a company is really serious. So too, that's how you tell if a country is serious. You've got 100 countries that have said, hey, we're going net zero, when in the middle of the century, when I'm the president, I'll be dead by then, so good luck, guys. The question is, okay, what is your so-called NDC? What is your commitment this decade? And if you look at as you know, under the Paris deal, the whole theory of the Paris deal was voluntary, but every 5 years, you have to come up with a more ambitious plan. That 5 years is now up. This is the year leading up to Glasgow, where every country needs to come up with a more ambitious plan for the decade, the so-called NDC. So far, about 100 have come in, and the rest will come in for the rest of the year. And of those 100, about half of them are better. Well, what about the other half? So don't give anybody a prize for saying, I've got a net zero over the middle of the century, unless they've also got some real ambition in the short term.
So I'd like to come back. I do want to save some time for questions from the floor, and I hope there will be questions from the floor. So I'm going to ask you one, maybe 2 more questions, and then open it up to the floor. I'd like to talk about activism for a second. I remember being in London when Extinction Rebellion first shut down London. And I remember sitting on Waterloo Bridge with them, and to the horror of my colleagues in the Foreign Office, because I managed to get on national TV sitting in the middle of the and I remember the commuters walking across the bridge, swearing at them. Yeah. You know, you're going to make me late for work. I can't catch the bus across the bridge. And that was the beginning of the week. By the end of the week, the conversations were transformed, and people were saying, good for you. You know, you've really brought this attention, this to our attention. Now, you mentioned Christine Lagarde, you mentioned the head of the IMF, the World Bank. What is the role of activism, and should we all be activists?
Well, if we were all activists, I guess there'd be no one for them to protest against. So yes, we should all be activists. Yeah, look, I mean, it's an incredibly important role. And you don't need to like them. You don't need to, agree with everything. But my goodness me, they are playing an incredibly powerful role. And we haven't had anything like this since, 50 years ago, 1970, the first Earth Day, where you had this incredible, suddenly, driven by Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, but also driven, quite frankly, by the Vietnam War and so on. You had this amazing outpouring. You had a Republican president in the White House, Richard Nixon, who didn't care anything about the environment, but within 6 months, you had the creation of EPA, you had the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, you had the most amazing things. Why? Because he realized actually politically it was sort of attractive to do, and people seem to want it. But since then, we really haven't had anything like that. We have it now, and let's just hope and pray that that it continues. I would make just one caveat, which is it's terribly important that we have a spirit of hope. And the only downside of activism that can sometimes be very, very pessimistic is that people say, the leaders will say, wait a minute, I mean, for heaven's sake, I mean, but having said that, overall, hugely important. And we need to give gratitude for them. And if some of you are thinking, well, I must admit, I don't react very well to them, that's fine. That's fine if you don't react well to them.
That's part of their job.
That's part, yeah.
And I would put, your boss in that category. He's an activist. He set up a $10 billion fund that he didn't need to do, so that pushes him into that area. I'd just like to come back to sort of where we started. We talk about the phase out of fossil fuels. We talk about the phase out of the internal combustion engine. We talk about the phase out of combined cycle gas turbines. I don't think, and think you probably agree with me, that we actually have the luxury of phase out. And so when we're talking about the scale of the challenge, do you think that people, us in this room, politicians, the average consumer, have really internalized the scale and the pace of the change that's going to have to take place over the next 10, 15 years? The fact that their roads are going to have to be dug up, the fact that their gas boilers are no longer going to be usable, the fact that they won't be able to put petrol in their petrol car from 2032 onwards. And what is the narrative we need to build, taking exactly your point about positivism, what is the narrative that we need to build in order to encourage people to not only sort of reluctantly get on board with that, but actually be a really active part of making this transformation, as you said at the very beginning, a really exciting time and phase for us all?
So that's an extremely important issue that we need to grapple with. So far, take, say, the United Kingdom. We've had a reduction in 40% or something, no, 30% of carbon emissions, and our GDP's gone up. The average person in Britain doesn't even know it's happened, because it's the same electricity's coming, it's the electrons coming into your house, it's just that they're coming from a different place. So it's not required any kind of personal change. In the 2030s, and even towards the second half of the 2020s, it is going to require some change. It's going to require the kind of disruption you talked about, my street's going to be dug up because you're going to have to put new things in there. It's going to require, actually, in the next decade, maybe even shifting your diet towards more plant-based. It's going to require, and what we've seriously failed to do is to have a strong narrative. And you need narratives that work for the corporate sector, that work for citizens, and obviously work for politicians as well. And we have to do two things. One, demonstrate that actually there's a world that's coming that is altogether better. I mean, there's going to be more green space in cities. It's going to be much more vibrant. You're going to be much healthier. Kids won't be suffering lung disease because they're absorbing, fumes from vehicles and so on. We haven't done a very good job on the positive. Very few countries have truly impressive narratives for their economy and their society in the 2020s and 2030s. So we have to do that. But there's a second thing we need to do, which is more difficult, which is, and today it was really great hearing from people like Kristen and so on this morning about the need for truly radical change. The changes that we require do require a bit of a war room setting. Now, my parents' generation and their parents, during World War II, everybody dug up their gardens and they turned parks into allotments where they grew potatoes and vegetables. Yeah, and nobody grumbled. Why? Because, my goodness me, we are going to win. So it's a delicate thing, actually, because you want the sort of hope story, but you've also got to have a realistic story about, for heaven's sake, this is the time of our lives, and we're called for a time like this, but it will require some change.
Yeah. I don't see anyone making their way to the microphone, so I'm going to carry on asking questions. Please do, because this is an opportunity to talk to Andrew. John Ashton, who was the Foreign Secretary's first special representative on climate change, talked about exactly this question about how you push that positive change, how you demonstrate that that this is a great time. And I remember him saying, even if climate change is not caused by man, wouldn't it be better if we didn't burn hydrocarbons creating emissions? Wouldn't it be better if we didn't create pollution? Wouldn't it be better if X, Y, and Z? And that seems like a really positive message that I think we need to get out. But I think the corollary of that is we do need to be truthful. Yes. This is not a transition without cost.
Yes.
Cost in convenience, cost in disruption, and cost to our pockets.
Yes.
And I think in making the positive argument for this transformation which is coming to us, I think we also need to be honest with each other and encourage our politicians to be honest with their voters.
Yes, that's absolutely right. There are ditches both sides of the street, understating and overstating. That's absolutely right. And your point about the sort of so-called co-benefits, terribly important. One of the first awards that we made at the Bezos Earth Fund was to electrify school buses in the United States. There are 480,000 of them, and virtually none of them are electric whatsoever. It turns out that the quality of air in a school bus in the United States is like 4 times less healthy than in your own home. And if you live in a disadvantaged area or area of color, it is 7 times worse. So these kids are going, and remember, education in America is driven by counties. Counties raise their money from real estate taxes, so it's massively unequal, where poor counties can't afford to tune up their diesel buses. And so these black and brown and disadvantaged children go to school every day breathing air as if they're in New Delhi or somewhere. I mean, it's incredible. So electrify the school buses. Not only do you actually help address climate change, you massively can help health conditions. In addition, you create a generation of young people, you link it to curriculum development about clean energy. They tell their kids, and as we were talking about this morning, in those long summer months when you don't need school buses, those buses are each worth up to $10,000 a year for their storage capacity for the local utility. So you get the utilities in the thing. So you sort of, wow, this is worth doing for exactly the kind of reason you're
Associated positively.
Yeah.
Question. In fact, 3 questions. Look at that.
Oh.
Hi, good afternoon. Not really a question, more of an introduction of an argument. My name is Michael Kasimov. I'm an investor in renewable energy. But we don't do the typical thing where we, build a solar park in Spain. Why? Spain is easy. Sounds good, easy to finance. There's no shortage of capital. Banks will line up. Now, how much is that going to do for the change that everyone is talking about and calling for? Little, because it's not new power. It's replacement power. It's likely to be sold into the existing grid. How does it change the infrastructure? It doesn't. So what we try to do, and we're not doing it philanthropically, we also see the economic value in it, we go to frontier markets. I'm an emerging market specialist by training, so we go to Central Asia, we go to Africa, we go to really deep Asia. Now, the governments there are totally willing and wanting to get utility scale solar. This is what we do. But this is when you run into the world, which is very different from what we see and hear on the screen. And having done this for the last 5 years, I emotionally have become very disillusioned in the talk because I see what's going on the ground. And there's no capital. Despite the absolute enormity of money printing, and I'm going to keep it simple without technical nonsense and stuff, it's just not there. Why? And I would argue that the reason for that sits in the economic crisis of 2008, which effectively has happened, is because of the mortgages and all the rest of it, the financial regulation was tightened, institutional capital cannot put anything on a balance sheet, that is not liquid, that is not, cannot be marked to market.
Can I ask you, I'm really sorry,
Sure,
there are other people
fine.
and we've got to
So
keep time.
The issue that I wanted to raise is that the only thing the only capital is available in the frontier markets where the utility scale power, renewable power is really needed, is that one of the DFI. DFIs do little to transform the market, create credibility, track record, and so on and so forth. You mentioned some very important words like de-risking, credit enhancement, and so on and so forth. How do you see, in a very sort of practical way, your institution being able to bridge that capital gap between the DFIs and the JP Morgans, the Goldmans, the cities of this world? How do we get the institutional capital that creates market into places like Congo, Madagascar, and so on and so forth?
Thank you.
Should we take 3?
Yeah, if you don't mind, we'll take 3 and then Andrew can address them all.
Hello, thank you, and very interesting conversation. My name is Nelson Majaro. I'm here with one of the companies that are presenting today, Hypervolt. And I'll just mention that it's not only the hope that we have solutions that right next to you. You have a box of EV charging that was presented today.
If you're not careful, I'm going to take it away with me afterwards and stick it on my wall at home.
Well, we can get another box that was for the prince, but definitely. The solutions are here, and they're smart. They are not only solving the issue of charging, but also solving the issue of grid management. There's an opportunity to work for the other markets, emerging markets. For my question now, based on what you were saying today, the path dependency issue, the need to advance in a disruptive way, is precisely, seems to be a sense of urgency, but not a sense of urgency to work collaboratively, to have a collective action to get it through. And I just put one example and then ask for your ideas on this. For the shipping industry in particularly, there is a need to advance and develop these new technologies for new fuels that need to be in the market for 2030, 2050, hydrogen, ammonia, you name it. There are proposals already, 5 billion fund from the industry and certain governments to be addressed at COP, but we need many governments to come in together and actually approve the funds to go through. It seems to be that is a process that is just managed for incremental.
I'm really sorry, can you?
The question is, what can the Bezos Earth Fund do to help unlock initiatives that are already out there towards COP that can not only do public-private impact, but actually accelerate the progress that we need.
Thank you. I'm really sorry to cut you short. I've spoken too much, and now we're right up against time. So if you can make your question really short, that would be great.
Absolutely, very brief. Good evening, good afternoon, gentlemen. Tiffany Harnson-Cram from Venture Rock, and we're looking at the problem of quantifying the global carbon situation. And I was wondering what technologies you found most promising.
Wow. How long do you have? 1 minute.
You've got about
1 minute.
Minute
so
and a half.
I think actually the first and second questions were fairly similar, which is, how do we actually get money into where it's really needed? And I think both Michael and Nelson raised the issue extremely well. Michael, sort of two ways of thinking about de-risking. You talk about renewable energy. The Minister of Finance of Indonesia, Sri Mulyani Indrawati, wonderful, wonderful woman, won the Finance Minister of the Year award. She said to us a couple of years ago, you guys keep saying that actually renewable energy is cheaper than coal, but I go into cabinet meetings and actually they give me all kinds of data that actually they can generate electricity more cheaply with coal. So are you right or are you wrong? And so we looked at it, and we showed that actually, if you take health effects, that in and of itself makes a difference. But even if you don't take health effects, the surprising thing was the following, that whilst Mexico was generating renewable solar energy for, in those days, 3 cents a kilowatt hour, in Indonesia it was costing like 11 cents a kilowatt hour. And so we think, is that the weather? Well, it turns out that about 3 of those cents are due to the weather difference. But what about the other 6 or 7 cents? Where do they come from? Why is it? It's because actually the financial system, the legal system, and the fact that they simply hadn't practiced enough. They simply hadn't done enough of these. And when you start, yes, it's more expensive, it comes down. So it's those brilliant discussion where suddenly, and she is a wonderful, wonderful finance, she said, so actually I have a role to play as Minister of Finance. Yeah. That is part of the de-risking we need. There are deals to be done that are not being done because we're leaving it to the private sector in and of its own can't necessarily have the kinds of high-level discussions. You need, I don't know why I keep pointing at you, I know you were an ambassador when I think of government, you're not government anymore, but we need governments that actually are going to come in and say, look, we'll work with you. And then David Malpass, the president of the World Bank, you need to speak to them and we need to put your money in. And by the way, you have a political risk guarantee facility called MIGA. Bring it in. It's the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. What role do we have? Possibly none, but actually maybe we do because we've got some resources we can put on the table. We can maybe help to provide not only analytical, but then some other risk management contributions. So that's how we need to look at that. And it's, I mean, in a way, it's exactly the same. I agree with you, Nelson, absolutely. And I'd like one of these too, actually. How do we engage? We need to bring the coalitions that involve all of the players together. It is amazing how these so-called hard-to-abate sectors now are becoming clear they're not quite as hard to abate as we thought, exactly as you say. We now have leaders of shipping companies, we have leaders of airlines, we have leaders and so on, the steel companies that are actually saying, we actually are interested, but we need some help. We need, exactly as we were talking about earlier with Kristen, we need, I mean, cement, you know, 40% of all the cement in the world is bought by governments. We need green procurement. That's one way that you can help drive the revolution. So that's, think of it as sort of, you're trying to turn a tanker quickly, you've got all of these arrows pointing at it, they all need to go full force and reinforce each other. And then finally, quantifying global, it's so important. I mean, we've made a lot of progress, but the really exciting thing, I mean, this morning it was great hearing from Kevin at AgriPoint because he's absolutely right. We can now measure what's called the carbon flux. We will, in 3 years from now, be able to measure the carbon flux in all rural spaces. One of the first grants that the Bezos Earth Fund made, $60 million to what's called Land and Carbon Watch, using exactly as what Kevin was talking about today, using satellite technology, using artificial intelligence, using drone technology and so on, to actually down to 10 meters by 10 meters everywhere on the Earth's surface, not only seeing carbon go up to the sky as trees fall or are burned, and also methane, but also see them coming back down in the form of regrowth and so on. Now, the other exciting thing is we're almost there on industrial and energy emissions too. And one of the other grants we made at the Bezos Earth Fund was for $30 million for satellite technology to measure methane emissions down to a very, very granular level as well. So I'd love Tiffany to have a longer conversation wherever you are. There you are afterwards.
So I've noted down a few things, and this will take me, I promise you, less than 30 seconds. And not one of them is a technology. Urgency, activism, transformation, justice, truth, risk, creativity, innovation, coalitions, and courage. And I think that sort of summarizes our conversation. Andrew Steer, thank you very, very much indeed for joining.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed.
Wow. I'm not going to say anything after that. Hannah, over to you, please. Our next company is Probiotic Holdings. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for attending. My name is Matt Wood, and I'm the founder and CEO of Probiotic Holdings. When I was a college student, I came to the realization that I could leverage the truly magical properties of microorganisms to bring health and sustainability to people, plants, animals, and the planet itself. I have been working on this ever since. In 2005, I founded this company to take advantage of the opportunity to make the next generation of materials using bacteria. We have made some big progress, and I'm happy to say that we have figured out the way to replace petrochemicals with bio-based materials, and in this way, we can disrupt the chemical market, create significant wealth and returns for our investors, and improve the sustainability of the planet and health of people. At Probiotic Holdings, we have developed a broad range of bio-based materials from fermentation to replace traditional petroleum-based chemicals in industrial, agricultural, and consumer applications. Not only have we developed these materials and how to produce them at scale, We have also validated their performance and commercial viability with multiple customers of recurring revenue. Based in Kansas City, Missouri, in USA, we own and operate 2 fermentation manufacturing facilities and state-of-the-art laboratories for molecular biology and biochemistry. We also have a network of licensed fermentation manufacturers producing our products under license in Poland, Hungary, South Africa, Brazil, Colombia, Australia, and India. With this background, we are ready to disrupt markets and realize rocket ship growth. With this presentation, I welcome you aboard the rocket ship. The problem we are solving is the heavy reliance on petrochemicals. Production of petrochemicals is a resource-intensive process that creates toxic, health-disruptive, and non-biodegradable end products, as well as massive carbon waste. As we all know, petrochemicals are intertwined through all our lives. In order to reduce the environmental and health impacts of petrochemicals, we had to come up with viable alternatives. When I say viable, I mean they have to work as well or better than petrochemicals, be used as direct substitutes, and have comparable cost. The good news is we have a viable solution. Using bacteria as living factories to produce bio-based materials that can replace petrochemicals. Through years of development and millions of dollars in investment, we have figured out how to harness the power of nature in microbial consortia fermentation. Using our proprietary fermentation platform, we can produce biosurfactants plus probiotics, which are non-toxic, biodegradable, with low regulatory burden because they are not genetically modified, modular and scalable manufacturing with strong profit margins. Probiotic Holdings is on a mission to replace 1 billion kilograms of petrochemicals with our biochemicals, produced more sustainably from friendly probiotics, with less impact on the environment and for the people working with these materials, and as you'll soon see, more profitably than current alternatives. What does this mean? There is an opportunity to disrupt the petrochemical market and lead the way to a more sustainable future. And guess what? We have already replaced 100 million kilos of petrochemicals to date. It's only 10% of our goal, but we are well underway. Just one class of petrochemicals that we can replace, known as surfactants, is more than $40 billion market size. With this presentation, I invite each of you on board the rocket ship. Now, you may be thinking this sounds good, but is it really that good? Well, for this reason, I want to briefly mention the LCA, life cycle analysis. This is the cutting edge of measuring a material or product's environmental footprint. It is the standardized methodology for determining the environmental impact a product has throughout its entire life cycle, including raw material extraction, transportation, manufacturing, distribution, end product, use, and end of life. So we engaged an ISO-certified third party to do the life cycle analysis on our products and compare them to petrochemicals that our products replace in application. As you can see in the graphs here, we have 84 to 95% reduction in water footprint and 60 to 87% reduction in carbon footprint. So as you can see, when we disrupt the petrochemicals market by replacing it with bio-based materials, we can have a real impact in improving the sustainability of the planet. We are currently moving aggressively into the commercialization stage with many of our previously developed products due to what we see as a window of opportunity in the market. This window is being opened due to 3 significant tailwinds that are moving towards the solutions we offer. Those forces are social, which includes environmental awareness, economic, and technological. There is greater social awareness of the downstream effects of pollution and demands by consumers, industry, and governments for clean and environmentally healthy products. Economic forces include the specialty chemicals market has recently benefited from historically inexpensive petrochemical feedstock, and in many cases the market is relatively mature and already enjoying the operating efficiencies that come from scale. In spite of these embedded advantages, many specialty chemical manufacturers are dissatisfied with their average gross margins. Building and permitting new petrochemical plants to further scale or to take advantage of new market opportunities is muddied with enormous complexity, resistance, and capital costs. They are often viewed by the public as dirty, dangerous, and generally undesirable. In addition, the pollution, waste, and effluent streams these plants generate often have very real costs for the company and perceived costs to society. As a result, the industry is actively searching for viable, more sustainable, and cost-effective alternatives. And the technological forces. The tools to cost-effectively identify microbial strains en masse has reached an important tipping point. This metagenomic information is leading to insights in metabolomics, proteomics, or how particular strains and species behave and how they can be trained to accomplish particular commercially interesting tasks. Lower cost analysis tools let the world get insights into how particular microbial strains behave, not just alone in a petri dish, but in a diverse mix of microorganisms, as they exist in nature and our proprietary microbial consortia. This all comes together to allow us to have developed our technology platform and products that can displace the old technology. Our research has uncovered groups or cultures of microbes that produce valuable secondary compounds much more efficiently than traditional manufacturing at a fraction of the cost. Importantly, by changing the environment and substrates that our microorganisms grow in, we change their behaviors and the quantity, quality, and characteristics of what they produce. We do this all without the use of genetically modified organisms. So their output is able to be used in markets like food production and human health products, and geographies where those traditional products are restricted. So we now have a platform technology, which is patented and trade secret protected, that allows us to fine-tune the outputs from our proprietary consortia, depending on specific needs, which we can scale to grow into future markets. This platform is in some ways more scalable than petrochemicals. And we've taken the extra measure to protect our intellectual property with a portfolio of patents and trade secrets that ensure we are able to extend this advantage for a long time to come. Now that we have developed these materials and validated their commercial performance, it is time to scale. In order to scale rapidly, we are simultaneously taking two routes to market. First, we will manufacture the end products ourselves in our own factories and sell them to distributors in the market. Second, we will license our technology platform to enable other fermentation manufacturers to produce these products. Now, let me give you an example of commercial validation in an industrial market. We have distribution agreement with Stahl Holdings. Stahl is a Dutch company owned by the French Wendel Group. Stahl enjoys the market leadership position in leather chemicals market globally. Through Stahl, our products are growing in sales on a global basis in a highly competitive leather chemicals market, actively replacing traditional chemicals to make a more sustainable leather product. To date, we have sold more than 5,300 tons to Stahl, and some of the largest tanneries in the world are in early stages of adopting our products. In the consumer market, we have used our technology platform to create products for household cleaning and air freshening, human health and hygiene, pets, and gardens. These products are manufactured by us and sold directly to end users through online channels like Amazon and Walmart. We have seen more than 400% increase in online direct-to-consumer sales last year and expect this to be a growing line of business for us. Because we manufacture these products ourselves, including our own bottling and packaging lines, we enjoy high margins for these products. In agriculture, we have developed a dozen products designed to improve farm productivity and profitability while reducing the use of traditional chemicals, including products for soil health, plant health, organic fertilizer production, livestock operations, and aquaculture. We have done dozens of studies on our products' performance, safety, and toxicity, including third-party studies and commercial partner trials. We have a broad portfolio of materials and applications from our technology platform, many of which already have recurring revenue customers. We have products with proven efficacy and commercial markets with some examples, including ScentGuard, a commercial microbial deodorizer, BioLivestock for raising animals and reducing antibiotics, and BioAg for reducing chemicals in agricultural applications. The numerous studies and research trials we have done and continue to do are great to develop applications and further develop the platform. However, the most important validation is the sales to discerning customers. With $8 million in revenue this year from mostly recurring revenue customers, we can see that the products are validated commercially. Now it is time to develop the sales and marketing to scale the revenue. Our probiotic cleaning line for household, industrial, and environmental applications has growing demand in the market. Just one example includes treatment of a recreational swimming lake in Los Angeles. Due to the bird use and runoff from the city, there were high levels of E. coli and other nasty pathogens in the lake, causing it to be shut down for swimming. In a demonstration trial, we were able to use organic fermentation products sold as SCD BioClean to bring down the pathogen organisms to safe levels, and the beaches were opened for swimming again. Until now, we have been largely focused on research and development. This is reflected in our management team. Beyond the company's 15+ years in research and development and fermentation manufacturing, Probiotic Holdings management team brings 100+ years of experience in microbiome technology, product development, and biochemistry. The experience is invaluable as Probiotic Holdings works with its customers in the development and distribution of new products. However, now is the time to aggressively scale, and therefore we are raising $15 to $25 million in equity capital with the main intent to build a world-class sales team and rapidly grow the revenue. Our board of directors is very experienced with large and small companies, publicly traded companies, manufacturing, and specialty chemicals. In summary, we are addressing large and growing markets in dire need of real-world economic solutions that move us towards a more sustainable society. The consumers are demanding these solutions now. Using microorganisms to replace much of the petrochemicals in our world is the way of the future. Not only do we have biomaterials developed and validated, but we have unique and defensible intellectual property. And we have a business model designed to allow us to leverage this intellectual property into these large and growing markets in such a way as to deliver outsized returns on investment. Considering the market forces demanding more sustainable products and the proven results we have in the market, I consider this company to be a rocket ship just now getting ready to launch. And with this, I welcome you aboard the rocket ship. The Probiotic Holdings opportunity is ideal for the investor who is looking to maximize the impact of their investment into a company with strong intellectual property, a broad product portfolio, and well into the commercialization stage of development. The use of funds will be going directly into the ongoing commercialization effort and therefore represents highly leveraged, low-risk way to get exposure to these large and growing markets. We are working with John Farr at Columbia West Investment Bank to raise the capital as fuel for our rocket ship. John is here, and we will happily follow up with any interested investors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As previously, the mic is available here. We have time for a couple of questions that I'm going to kick off. Could you expand a bit further on the different focuses on markets over the next few years and what markets you're looking to enter into just a bit further?
Sure. We break the product applications into 3 different segments. One is industrial. And in the industrial market, we are currently selling into leather chemicals and textile chemicals markets. And we've developed prototypes and are doing commercial trials in paper manufacturing chemicals. And we have prototypes for oil and gas. And then a second segment is agricultural market, basically products for reducing or replacing petrochemicals in agriculture production. And then we have our consumer products, which include household products and detergents that are bio-based, health supplements for people, and products for pets.
Thank you very much. If we don't have any further questions, then thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
Hi, Matthew, thank you for the presentation. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the 140 billion market opportunity? I think you described the sectors already, but can you give me more visibility about what are these markets and how much they're dependent on the IP filing that you had in the previous slides?
Sure. So one of the markets is the $40 billion surfactants market. And basically, $40 billion worth of surfactants are 99% petroleum-based, and those go into industrial products and household products, like all of your detergents and cleaning products and personal care products. Another segment is in consumer products, the household products and the dietary supplements. And then the third segment is agricultural chemicals. It's another $50 billion segment, basically replacing petrochemicals used in agriculture production.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Next up,
Thank you.
We have Sergey Ogordonov, CEO of Voltaware.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming here. We'll try to make it efficient and understandable for everyone. So, as you know, at Voltaware, we've been working with energy industry for about 6 years now. And let me introduce myself. I'm Sergey Ogordonov, a CEO and founder of Voltaware. So the industry is transforming, as we all know. What is happening to the consumer side? So electrification of homes, so introduction of electrical vehicles is bringing more and more energy costs to the consumer. So there's a need for people to save money even more. So all these petroleum costs, which have been and still are in the petroleum cars, are coming into electrical bill, in a way. Paid by yourself or paid by the company, but still the cost on the electrical side is increasing. So we have disruptive tech, which can solve this new demands from the consumer side and also the demands on electrical utilities side, which face huge competition to keep the customer and actually for the challenges to change the world and to gain the customers. So, and we see that more and more people need customer retention tools which are not expensive, and customers need easy to use, simple applications where they understand what's going on with their energy. So there have been attempts on the utility side to launch dashboard type of products where they simply take the data, they put it in a graph, and they show it to you. I mean, we've seen that with no intelligence, with no explanation, people are not interested in looking at numbers and graphs. And as we can see, that this kind of applications have only 5% of engagement over time. So what we do at Voltaware, we are changing the way utilities interact with their customers. And I'll speak about the climate impact application of this technology further. But for utilities, it's critical to drive engagement and to make sure they can generate new revenue, not just lose money and invest in something which they cannot pay back. So we are a team of about 25 people. We have quite an experienced management team, and also half of the company is data science and machine learning experts. So this is core of our company. So we believe that AI and applications of artificial networks, can create absolutely different world, absolutely different kind of smart home, which people were looking for. Now it's becoming possible. So what do we do? So we are taking the data either from the smart meters in the countries where smart meter rollout has been over and we have good data, or we use our proprietary sensors, which can use, you can install them yourselves in a fuse box. And actually, the core of our technology is a disaggregation algorithm which breaks down the total load by appliance level. So we know exactly when you switched on your washing machine, it was over, when you're charging your electrical vehicle, whether you did it in the right time or not. So we know all that. And out of that knowledge, the main use cases, really usable use cases, are coming into. So what is there for consumers? The first one, it's the first time utilities can provide you the bill you can understand. It's like in the telecom sector, you can open up your telecom bill and see, okay, why is £300 this month when it was 50 last month? Okay, I've been stupid, I've been calling America on a normal line. Shouldn't happen again. But if you have a shock bill on electricity, it's really highly unlikely you're gonna get details. So now the demands from the customers are, we want to get the details, and this is now possible. So utilities we work with can provide the detailed bill where everything is transparent, you understand exactly where the money is going, where you have spent what, and you get advice of how to improve it. So without knowing where you're spending, you cannot be efficient. And there's a huge amount of energy waste. You cannot imagine how much in percentage energy waste we all have. I personally discovered about 25% of energy waste in my house when I started to use this application, when I forgot simply to switch off the boiler from winter. It was part of the electrical boiler. So we all have these things. Then you can unlock value-added propositions with this data. For example, you can ask the customer to actually shift your load during, from peak hours, if you can understand that washing machines and some heavy other things are being used during very expensive times. You can advise the customer to shift the load a little bit. You can even automate it. You can send the plugs. You can actually get the customer connected to a new machine if this is already connected to internet, washing machine or whatever. And actually you can help the customer not only change the behaviors, but you can advise on the change in inefficient appliances, because you can now compare them to the others. You can see which are becoming the old ones, and this is where the critical advice is coming into. So predictive and safety component as well, quite peace of mind is very important. Security is very important to everybody. And this is actually what people are paying for in the smart home today. But here, the cost is so low because we're using smart meter data, which is already available, and the cost of processing is very small. We can give really critical advice. For example, you're leaving home and you've left your oven on. So we run the algorithm for the next 30 minutes and we understand what is on in your home. And once you leave Wi-Fi, the phone leaves Wi-Fi. It can tell you, oops, you've left your oven, which is the dangerous appliance, you should come back. If it was a fridge which is just coming on and coming up and down, it's no worries, because it's an automatic appliance and it has to be on and off. So this is bringing a big component of peace of mind to people's homes. You don't have to save the world every day, but if you save your house once a year, that's already something. And very interesting application on the health of the vulnerable people. So we look at the routines of different people. So we split the day into 3 main time periods: morning, afternoon, and night. And we understand, we see automatically how people behave if routines are followed in the few last weeks and months. And if people miss the routines, for example, an elderly parent living alone has missed his breakfast or has missed his lunch, there's a number alert coming already, so should be attentive. And if more than 2 routines are missed, then there's a red alert. You should call the parent, you should take an action. And this is a critical application for all the utilities. Everyone has asked for this, because this is something really valuable to people. It's not only connected to the climate world, it's connected to health and safety of most vulnerable group of people in the world. So you can also use this information in intelligent selling, because we know where EVs are coming without bothering people. We already know, okay, in this postcode in the UK, in London, there are 5 new EVs have emerged. You know, people are charging it this time of day. They're using that much power. That's the cost of it. And this information, this big data, can be available on kind of postcode basis, obviously not disclosing anything, to people like BP, Shell, Total, whatever, companies who are rolling out chargers in the areas for planning of their charging infrastructure. And all utilities are now selling insurance products, and we can detect that people, for example, on holidays, so home is more vulnerable for fire, whatever, other accidents, so they can offer daily-based offering, which is time-of-use insurance, which is quite popular at the moment. So we run a simple range of APIs. Everything is white-labeled. Everything is based on an SDK. So utilities can simply tap into our document, copy-paste pieces of code, and actually make either their own application based on our technology and cherry-pick the devices they want, or they can use our white-label application for their customers. So we are bringing value at all levels. So for the customers, we all now understand our bills better. We know how to optimize energy use because we know the details by appliance level. So we improve the comfort and peace of mind, not only of ourselves, but our vulnerable relatives. And for utilities, it's driving customer engagement. The response has been amazing from all the customers who have used it, and the churn rate reduced for those utilities who have used our technology and who are using our technology. So people are more staying with them longer. Actually, you can inform better product decisions. You can make your offers more precise to special groups. And it unlocks new revenue opportunities. And for the environment, if you think about it, if just European customers would have got this kind of energy bills, so on average, it would save about 200 million CO2 a year, which is probably 3-4 major integrated oil and gas companies emit a year, just a number. And just one thing is needed, good smart meter data, just good granular. It's just a push of a button on the software of a policy. So this is where the funds like Andrew Steer is representing could be a real help, because it's really the pointed impact, but at almost no cost to the society and to the policyholders, with huge value add for everyone. So we started our deployment in the beginning of 2020 with Utilita, 7th largest utility in the UK. We're rolling to 1.2 million customers. It's a national rollout. And this has been software-only offer, which is scaling very fast. You don't need any extra cost because we're using just smart meter data here, which is available. Octopus Energy, many people know this company, quite disruptive. Already 2 million customers. So we've done an amazing pilot with them. We're working with them. You can buy our stuff, our sensors on the website, working with Octopus and Energy Insights. And it's been most viewed forum on their website, and 70% of the customers using the service twice a week. So we support agile customers, people who have either EV or battery or solar panel, and they're interested to understand the how much they spend and what appliances are being used in the hours. The tariff is being very high. An agile tariff is where they charge 5 times more than normal tariff, but they don't charge anything at all for the rest of the day or night. So this is where it's becoming a critical application and very interesting one. Also, we're working with a company in Italy, in southern Italy, in the Isles, which is making an IPO now to raise funds and to actually push this as a national rollout. So we gave them our hardware and an application. So Efficento is the brand.